Alright guys, welcome to chapter 3 of AICE International History. This chapter is all about the League of Nations in the 1930s. So last chapter was League of Nations in the 20s, this one is the 30s, so it's basically the same 6, 7, same thing. Just different decade. So let's get into it. So, chapter 3.1a is all about the impacts of the Great Depression on politics in Europe. So, first, what was the Great Depression? So, the Great Depression started with Black Friday, which was not the sales event of Thanksgiving, but it was basically when the US economy crashed on October 29th, 1929. Sorry. And basically, that led to a huge period of that was due to a huge period of people just irresponsibly buying shares in the stock market. And a share is a means of investing money in businesses. Shares in a successful company rise in value, and investors want to buy them at low prices and then grow them, but this is not ACE business. However, once these shares became heavily devalued, people started taking out loans to buy shares, and then they would never pay them back. And then eventually October 29th, everything caught up to them, like this, like 10 years of irresponsible spending. And then a lot of people saw the bad side of this. And this is a lot of people depending on unemployment benefits, which are payments made by the state to people who are unable to find a job. There were no jobs, and obviously this led to deflation, which is a general decline in prices caused by the reduction in the supply of money and credit. So reduction in the ability to buy. So they couldn't buy it. Deflation, same concept that we saw in the 1.1 long depression thing. And yeah, it was basically the whole issue in the US with the stock market crash. However, in Europe, this period of economic stagnation led to a lot of things. Like basically this led to the rise of political extremism. So the first example of this is Germany, which is the rise of Adolf Hitler. And Adolf Hitler came to he rose through the ranks through the use of stormtroopers. And like this was like his early military, and they were Nazi gangs that specifically used violence against Hitler's opponents. Far from hiding these violent methods, Hitler boasted about them, and worried about the possibility of a communist revolution, the authorities did little to stop them. So basically, the fear of communism prevented authorities from stopping these violent gangs. Now, this whole thing was with Hitler's obsession with establishing a third Reich. A Reich is an empire, and basically he thought that the first Reich was the Holy Roman Empire, and the Second Reich was the German Empire that lasted until 1918. And he thought that he was going to bring about the Third Reich. Basically, him wanting to show that Germany was powerful and that under him this would be possible. A similar thing happened in Spain, where Francisco Franco came to power during this decade, and he was a very extreme nationalist among the ranks of Hitler, but less genocidal and less globally unstabilizing. He was just very bad for the Spanish people, but the United States, all of us, we didn't really pay attention to that. And then Japan, which was a military dictatorship, and they were basically very much militarizing, very much nationalist, wanting to grow their country. And this was all because people felt unsatisfied about their economy, so they resulted to extremism, which is a very common human thing to do. During times of poor economic performance in a country, many inhabitants tend to turn towards extremism. Now, all these um, institutions, all these governments were totalitarian, and a totalitarian system of government is a government that is centralized, dictatorial, and requires complete subservience to the state. So, no defiance, no thinking against the state. Basically, the state was controlling everything, and this is what people looked for in times of need. So those three countries I mentioned have separate dictators. Germany was through Hitler. So what were Hitler's points? One, Hitler opposed the Treaty of Versailles. He thought that the Treaty of Versailles was strictly unfair with Germany for no other reason. He thought that Germany was like getting the short end of the stick, and that it was the Treaty of Versailles was just not good to Germany, and um really, like, how can I say this? Really, like, um really like in a way that was evident that it was against Germany. Like he really didn't like that. So he argued for three things. One, he argued for rearmament. Two, he argued for ditching the Treaty of Versailles. And three, he argued for Lebensraum. Lebensraum is the German idea that the German people, the Aryan people, need living space. That's what Lebensraum means, living space or living room for themselves. And his idea of getting Lebensraum was taking Eastern Europe and the Slavic lands and just making them like a place for the Germanic people to live and expand. And this led to concerns in Britain and Russia. Russia mainly because of the Lebensraum idea and literally the first round of fire because of Lebensraum were Poland and Russia. So Russia was like really concerned about that. France and Britain were concerned because a rearmed Germany meant a new threat, like a revival of the threat. Same as Italy. Italy was very close to Germany was very close to Italy. They were only separated by the small little panhandle of Austria. And obviously another one of Hitler's aims was Anschluss, which was the unification of Germany and Austria. So Italy felt like this new rearmed Germany could really hit them hard. Now Japan was led by Hideki Tojo. And basically, Hideki Tojo was known for three things: invading Manchuria, leaving the League, and signing a pact with Germany. He invaded Manchuria in 1931 through the justification sought through the Mukden incident. The Mukden incident was when his own army, the Kwangtung Army, went into Manchuria, which was an area in China. Sorry. And they blew up a train and used this as a way to justify that the Chinese authority was blowing up Japanese trains in Manchuria when it was actually them who blew up the train. Then they left the League in 1933. This was because they felt like the League was being unfair to them, and they had ideas of their own singular greatness that did not involve the League. So they just left. And third was their alignment with Germany in the Anti-Comintern Pact, which outlined a heavily anti-communist idea for their world view and their foreign policy. And this was signed in 1936, and it was also pretty concerning for all these powers that were near them. And lastly, Italy had Mussolini as their leader. And Mussolini at first was really in touch with the Allies. He was really with these people, the British, French. He was really aligned with them because of their alignment in World War I and also his fear of Germany. However, once after 1934 hit and the Stressel Front, which was basically like when Germany was trying to be kept at bay by France and Britain, just failed, the Italians became more aggressive in their own right. Basically, Italy had Eritrea and parts of Somalia that they had under their control, and these were around an area called Abyssinia, which is modern-day Ethiopia. So what Italy did was take people from those areas in 1935, their troops, and they forced them to invade Abyssinia. And this caused a whole thing in 1935, and Italy then took that as an advantage to leave the League of Nations so they couldn't get involved in what happened. So now the League of Nations left, was losing members a lot during the 1930s. And then once they left the League of Nations, they signed two treaties with Germany, the Rome-Berlin Axis and the Pact of Steel. This is just like a Pokemon and an evolved Pokemon. So the Rome-Berlin Axis was just like, oh yeah, we're friends. Pact of Steel is we are ride or die. We are going to, like, if Germany goes to war, I'm going to war. It was like I told you, like little pacts, just okay, Rome-Berlin Axis, like okay, we align our ideals, and Pact of Steel is like, damn, like we are best friends, like you mess with him, you mess with me, like okay, this is very much concerning. And a lot of these people got to power through propaganda, and propaganda is basically just the communication of a political or other message by appealing to people's emotions rather than their reason, so pathos, encouraging them to be excited rather than to think. So they wanted people to be like, yes, 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 great Italy, great Germany, yes, we're doing amazing, rather than being like, wait, are we actually doing amazing? And that's how they succeeded. Okay, so one of the largest geopolitical events of the 1930s that the League of Nations was involved in was the Spanish Civil War. So Spain had a constitutional monarchy, which is basically a monarchy in which the king or queen is the head of state with powers limited by a written constitution. And this is kind of like what we see in Britain, where the king or queen has no real power, and they're just there as a ceremonial figure. This differs from a constitutional government, which is a system of government in which the powers are limited by a written constitution, since a constitutional government does not need a monarch. And it also differs from a democracy, which is a system of government in which the citizens exercise power by electing representatives to form a governing body, since a lot of constitutional monarchies are democracies, but not entirely, since they don't elect every single head of government. Now, this weird political mumbo jumbo in Spain, and socially the king being irrelevant, and economically the country doing bad due to the Great Depression, and politically the country just being weak in general, led to the Civil War, which is a war between citizens of the same country. Now, there were many main factions during this war, and basically the League of Nations was like, you know what? This is Spain versus Spain. No one else gets involved. However, this was that time of the League of Nations history where it's like countries were leaving, in the process of leaving, already left. So Italy, Germany, and the USSR each got involved. Italy and Germany were trying to show off their new toys, which obviously were not little tinker toys. They were high-grade military weapons that weren't really toys, but they were still there, you know. They were like, they were still relevant and they were still there. However, they didn't follow the policy of non-intervention. They funded Franco, helped him militarily, and they were trying to push their nationalist ideology onto Spain. Now, the USSR was doing the opposite. They were funding anyone who would go against the nationalists, because the nationalist government meant another communist, unfriendly government in the region, and that really did not please the USSR. So the USSR was funding just anyone that would go against Franco, and this kind of led to like there being a more united, cohesive front in favor of Franco than against him. So this led him to win. Now, this was really a major event because it showed that Germany and Italy had huge military powers. They were able to get a new ally in the region, and the USSR was being more like encrunched into their little corner in the Eastern Europe. Now, although Germany was focusing more on although Germany was focusing more on re-militarizing and doing all that, they were also focused on expansionism. Now, expansionism is when you grow your territory. And basically what Hitler was doing this whole time was that Hitler wanted to get on the good side of the Allies. Kind of like he would go unnoticed. However, the things that he was trying to do were very intense. Hitler made conscription, which is compulsory military service for certain groups of society, such as men between certain ages. He made them like a core part of German. He made a conscription law, and this is basically one of the main things that ended up in him rearming Germany. And also, he tried to unite with Austria in 1934, but that attempt failed. However, through conscription, he was able to rearm Germany, defying the Treaty of Versailles. And then Britain, France, and Italy, seeing that Germany was starting to become like this huge thing, formed the Strasser Front. Now, the Strasser Front was where they would unite against Germany, and they would fight, like not fight, but like they would try to keep them at bay together. However, Germany signed the Anglo-German Naval Pact in 1936 or 7, 6 or 7, um, and this led to them being, the Strasser Front being debilitated. Now, the Rhineland, which was demilitarized in the Treaty of Versailles, was remilitarized in 1936, which is right next to France, and this made France really get on edge with the new Germany. As if that wasn't enough, the Rome-Berlin Axis with Italy and the anti-Comintern Pact with Japan really solidified who supported Germany in this new world order, how everything was changing, and this was pretty much like they were trying to see that Germany was not something to be messed with. And then in 1938, Germany committed Anschluss, which is the union of Austria and Germany, into one country, which was forbidden by the Treaty of Versailles, but Germany still did it anyways in 1938. And then with Czechoslovakia in 1939, they took the Sudetenland, which was an ethnically German territory. And this was basically showing how Germany just kept expanding, and then the Sudetenland was really the last time that the Allies practiced appeasement. And for those of you who don't know, appeasement is a policy of giving in rather than confronting demands made by aggressive nations. So they were basically just succumbing to Germany's demand instead of defying them. Okay, guys, anyways, thank you so much for sticking around. I hope you guys become more educated. Hope this actually helped you guys. And yeah, I hope you guys actually learned from this video. Don't forget